You're joking, aren't you? It's the Teesside Chef. Hey, you want to stick around and watch all of this video because my Christmas house has everything. Soiled mattresses, an abandoned washing machine rotting away proudly, even an old knackered settee that has a family of hedgehogs living in it. And of course, an England flag to fly proudly for some reason. So first we need inadequate foundations for my social housing unit here. So we're making a thin chocolate cake first with 60 grams of all-purpose flour, a teaspoon of baking powder, and I promise I'll be quick here, and 25 grams of unsweetened cocoa powder, and make sure you sieve all that to be extra professional here, and go in with a little pinch of salt if you like, and 30 grams of almonds. And then once that's all in there, put this all to one side, will yous? Because we're going to cream 100 grams of caster sugar and 50 grams of softened butter together here in a separate bowl. And this is a great chocolate cake recipe. And there will be a link coming up in the description for this go-to chocolate cake recipe, the full recipe here. So look out for that one when I can be bothered to do it. And now we've creamed all that together, let's whip through this quickly now, eh? So get your dry ingredients back in along with 2 eggs and lob a tablespoon of your dry into the creamed mix there. And fire an egg in as well. And give it a good old whisk up. Incorporate that fully. And we want this council house foundation to be extra thin so that over time the floor heaves after being built on an unsuitable brownfield site and the internal doors don't open and close properly anymore. And hopefully the house will become infested with rising damp at some point, which will be great for your kids' lungs. And now we've got our eggs in there and we've whipped it all together, we can give our dry ingredients a good old stir before they go in. And I've got 90 millilitres of milk with half a teaspoon of coffee and some vanilla essence here. So I'm giving that a really good stir, and then we can get this cake foundation boxed off. And with any cake you want to stagger your dry and wet ingredients when you put them in, so I'm putting half of these dry ingredients in here, followed by half of me old cheeky milk mix there, and stir it up to incorporate every time you do this. But we're only going to do this twice here. So repeat the process, get it in and mix it all up. And then your cake is all mixed and ready to go in the tin. So if you haven't skipped forward and you're still watching this part of the video, I'm using a rectangular tin here for me cake, because that's the shape of my garden. And it is quite well appointed, I have to say, is my garden. And of course I have to line my tin here with some baking paper, which, funnily enough, is about the thickness of my internal walls in my little piece of paradise. And it is really important to line your pan with some paper and give it a good buttering. I mean, I don't want my cake sticking here. I've got enough problems, haven't I? I mean, look at my house. So let's be nice and generous with our butter here, because we need something in our pan to help that paper stick. And now our paper's coming in and that's been cut to size nicely, and that'll just go in there. And then we need to butter the top of the paper, of course, and go around the sides of the cake pan as well. And I reckon that's coming along nicely now, so get our cake mix back in and give it a little bit of a stir up before you put it in your pan. And you already want your oven preheated here, 160 degrees fan, and we're going to bake this cake for about 20 minutes. But before it goes in, we need to make sure we spread the mix out as evenly as possible, with this being an extra thin cake. And get an offset spatula in there to help if you've got one, but if not, just crack on with a spoon. Give its head a good shake, and we're all good and ready to rock. And while that cake's baking away, I'm going to do my biscuit mix now. And it's a standard shortbread mix, this one, but I'm going to mix it in my machine for convenience here. So 350 grams of all-purpose flour's already gone in there with 1/4 teaspoon of salt and 150 grams of caster sugar, along with 2 teaspoons of ground cinnamon and a teaspoon of ground ginger. I mean, that'll give these biscuits a nice Christmassy flavour, I suppose, but if Christmas flavours are so great, why don't we all eat them in the summer? Anyway, I've gone in with 200 grams of cold butter, and now I want to mix all that up in my machine until it looks like breadcrumbs. And I'm putting 2 tablespoons of that juice that comes from those Christmassy oranges here, whatever they're called. Them Christmas oranges, you know, I don't know what they're called. I mean, I didn't see an orange till I was 14 anyway. I mean, look at my house. Anyway, I've mixed all that up, as you can see if you're still watching, and I'm going to get it in a bowl here. And I can knead this a little bit here to bring it together, and it might be a little bit dry, to be honest. So if it is, just give it a little splash of council pop, and that's water to all you middle-class people out there. And then knead it a little bit more. Bring it all together. And if it's not cracking and looks just like a smooth mix, that's good to go. And I'm going to let that rest in the fridge for a bit, so let's get it nice and tucked in. And I have still got some cling film left after fixing my car window last night. After next door's kids put a brick through it. Oh, and look, the cake's done. And you'll know it's done because it'll be pulling away from the sides of the pan and it'll bounce back when you press it on top, and a toothpick inserted should come out clean, you see. And now let's replicate my wonderful garden on top of this foundation. So 100 grams of both milk and dark chocolate, chopped up nice and finely. And I'm not usually this fast at chopping chocolate, but I had to rip through this pretty quick because there was a debt collector at the door. I mean, I wasn't going to answer the door, I just wanted to hide before he looked in the kitchen window. Anyway, that's all chopped now, and then we can add 125 millilitres of hot double cream to that. And once that cream's had a chance to melt the chocolate, we can give it a good stir up and make a lovely chocolate ganache. And even though my garden's filled with all kinds of rubble and whatnot, I'm going to sieve this chocolate ganache, but if you want a more realistic version of this house, you can throw a few little pebbles in here if you like. A few empty Coke cans or some dog turds or wherever. But in any event, you want to cover it with cling film and press down on the top there. And our cake's had about 10 minutes to cool down now, so we're going to get it back in and get it out of this pan. And just to be on the safe side, we're going to go around the edges with a blunt knife here to help preserve the structural integrity of this cake. And then we can get this tin off it and put it on a grid to cool down properly, because you want it to be fully cooled before you put the ganache on top. And don't forget to take the paper off here, or you'll end up with a mouthful of paper when you eat this, won't you? Anyway, let's get rid of this for now, because we've got to get cracking here, you know, and sort out our biscuit mix and that. So let's get this back in and get it out of bed, and let's flour this surface generously here, because I can't be arsed with this sticking everywhere. And of course, you want to also flour the top of your mix before you roll it out. And I'm going to roll this out to about 6 or 7 millimeters thick. A bit thicker than a normal biscuit, but not too thick. About as thick as the crack that runs up the side of my house, if you've seen it. And hey, these pre-cut paper shapes, which have been architecturally designed, will help me construct this prefabricated building. So if you're making this house, and I can't imagine that you will, cut the dough out to the correct shape with your front, back and the roof. And don't forget the gable ends, because if you don't have them, there'll be nothing for the kids to kick a football against all day and bloody night. And you might have noticed I cut the roof out a little bit bigger than I needed to give me a bit of an overhang for birds and bats to nest in. And we saved the front of the house until last, because I'm going to cut out the doors and windows here. And to keep costs down, they're a standard size, poorly insulated, and they take on about a pint of condensation every night. But it's all good, you know, because the working classes don't deserve adequate housing. And that looks pretty good, so let's get that on the tray. We have to be a little bit more careful with that because of the holes in it, making it a little bit more unstable. And my garden just would not be my garden without a few random transit van doors lying around, so let's do them now. And these came from a Mark III transit van, and I can't remember how or why I have them, but they're out of sight and out of mind in the garden, so I don't really care. Maybe I could sell them on eBay, but they're all rotten now because I bought them in 1996. But in any event, these need to be shaped correctly, of course, and you might notice I did include the door handle on these here. And my gaff would just not be my gaff without the incongruously large tree that was planted 3 feet from my kitchen wall for some reason, so we do have to make that here. Unfortunately, I haven't included a recipe for roots here because they will eventually cause subsidence, so it's best to leave them out. And make sure when you cut in the tree shape that it looks like an old man's arthritic hand, because it won't be authentic otherwise. And we are going to decorate this tree later, nice and Christmassy, so stick around for that. And of course, we need a poorly maintained fence to go around my garden, and I put my fence up myself after 15 pints, so you don't have to make yours look too nice here. But do make sure you have enough fence panels for the size of your garden. You can spread them out though and leave lots of gaps, and you don't need a gate because somebody stole mine last Christmas. And these biscuits can all be baked at 140 degrees fan setting for 20 minutes and then turn the oven off and leave them in for another 20 minutes. And while they're baking, we can finish the garden. And I love a bit of gardening, me, so start by pouring your ganache on. And you might need to heat this in the microwave first to make it pourable. 10-second bursts. Don't put it all in there for like a minute or whatever. Otherwise, the inside of your microwave will end up looking like my shattered mattress. And spread this ganache out as evenly as you can, but you don't need to be perfect, do you? Because my garden looks like a bomb site. And now we can leave that ganache to firm up while we mix some builder's mortar to put this house together. And I'm going to make some chocolate royal icing here, and I've gone in with 2 egg whites. And I've added a tablespoon of unsweetened cocoa powder to that. And you need to keep stirring this to incorporate everything. And then you just need to keep adding icing sugar in stages, whisking every time. And this will stick the house together and will probably last longer than the render did on the hovel that I live in. And it must be ripe for slum clearance now because every house around me is boarded up. They still managed to catch on fire though. Funny that, isn't it? Anyway, never mind all that bollocks because I'm putting this chocolate royal icing in a piping bag here because it'll be a lot easier to apply. But if you haven't got a piping bag, just use a trowel or wherever you would normally use to render a house. And we're almost done now, but first we need an old abandoned settee, or couch if you're all posh. And I'm just doing this with some pink fondant. And I always like to have a large discarded piece of furniture in my garden for a bit of atmosphere. And if I remember rightly, the arse fell out of this settee during the last World Cup. That's why it's in the garden. It took 4 of us to carry it outside. And for added realism, I'm making a dog's egg with this little bit of brown fondant. And it's always a Jack Russell that laid that in my mind's eye. And next comes the old abandoned washing machine, of course, and the old mattress that I had to get rid of a couple of weeks ago. I had drunk lots of Guinness and taken lots of prescription painkillers that night, if I remember correctly. And this mattress really comes to life if you cut this authentic little crisscross pattern here with your knife. And remember, this mattress did unfortunately receive a heavy dose of treacle-like defecation, so we can replicate that here with a bit of chocolate powder. And let's finish this washing machine here by cutting out some black fondant for the door and a little bit more for the buttons, which don't work anymore. And that's near enough, but we need a little bit more dimension on that door. So we're going to need a ring of white fondant, and I do wish my washing machine still worked because it was great for washing clothes, you know. And the only thing left to do now is cut out my England flag, which I display proudly. And this is really simple to do, but as you work with thinner fondant, you do need icing sugar to stop it sticking to everything. And I'll be able to stick the red lines of St. George or whoever or whatever they represent on top of it by using a little bit of water as glue. And seeing that flag there's geeing me right up with lots of misplaced nationalism and unsavoury rhetoric. So while I'm all fired up, I'm going to cut off the excess here. And that flag looks sharp as a dart there. I'm going to love putting that on the side of my house. And our biscuits are ready now according to the oven timer. So we're ready to get cracking with our lovely council house. But I do need to single the front of the house out here because I'm going to put some graffiti on it. I love a bit of graffiti in your own house. And I've written Daz 2K on here, but you can write what you like on yours. And we could build our house separately and then plonk it straight on the top of our cake. But I've gone with a more complicated version because I haven't got time for it to dry because I need to get this video finished so I can get the dinner on. And this has taken less time to build than my entire council estate took in the 60s. So now we can get some more icing down the side and you can put the fence up. And this can be as random as you like, and you could even break a few pieces if you like. Keep a piece of the fence spare to one side to hit your neighbour with when he won't turn his music down. And I was so drunk when I put my own garden fence up that I can't remember doing it. But I remember doing this one because it's on video, innit? So that's a bonus. And as you can see, I've covered my tree with some more royal icing and I've put some M&Ms on it for a Christmassy splash of colour. And I like to do this on my real tree with different coloured crisp packets. And now we're going to plant our tree and make sure that you plant it a little bit too close to the house because not only will that be authentic, but you'll also be able to lean it against the house if you're having trouble getting it in. And don't forget to put your path down that you cut out earlier. And this is really coming together now with our old settee featuring a Jack Russell egg. And my old washing machine with a minor electrical problem. And my shattered mattress And the least said about how that happened, the better, although I have already explained how it happened. And make sure you scatter your transit van doors around as randomly as possible. And I'm going to give this a steam with my fondant steamer here, but if you close your eyes, this could be smog from the local chemical works, or freezing sea fret coming in from the North Sea. And that's my Christmas house brought to life through the medium of cake and biscuits. And I'm going to have a great Christmas in here, let me tell you, boys and girls. And if you're feeling generous this Crimbo, give me a like and a subscribe, and that'll be enough for me. Merry Christmas, everybody, eh? Ta-ra.